At 75, Eleanor Ward had learned that silence carried its own kind of peace. Her days were simple but filled with small rituals that kept her connected to the life she had built. The soft hum of her old radio in the mornings, the gentle creak of the wooden floors she had polished for decades, and the warmth of sunlight that filled her kitchen around noon. The little blue house she lived in wasn't just a building. It was a living memory of her husband, Daniel, who had laid each brick with his own hands. Every scratch on the wall, every faded photograph, every uneven doorknob carried a story, and she held on to them the way she held on to her breath. Quietly, lovingly. Eleanor's life changed the day she received an unexpected call from her granddaughter, Mia. "Grandma," Mia had begun, her voice trembling just enough to sound desperate. "We're in a bit of trouble. Derek lost his job, and things are tight. Could we stay with you for a while? Just until we get back on our feet?" Eleanor didn't hesitate. Family was family. And Mia, her sweet, cheerful granddaughter, had always held a special place in her heart. She remembered Mia as a child running barefoot through her garden, laughing with daisies in her hands. If Mia needed help now, Eleanor was ready. "Of course, dear," she said warmly. "My home is your home." When Mia and Derek arrived 2 days later, things felt hopeful. Mia gave Eleanor a long, warm hug and said, "You're a lifesaver, Grandma." Derek smiled politely, carrying in boxes. They seemed grateful, a young couple trying to recover from hardship. Eleanor cooked them a welcome meal, humming softly as she prepared Daniel's old stew recipe. At the dinner table, the three of them talked about jobs, dreams, and new beginnings. For the first time in years, the house felt full again. But that feeling didn't last. It started subtly, soft shifts that Eleanor almost dismissed. One morning, she found her favorite rocking chair moved to the storage room. When she asked why, Mia laughed lightly and said, "We needed space for our workstation, Grandma. You don't sit there much anyway." Then Mia and Derek began taking over the kitchen. Her neatly arranged spices were shoved aside, her ceramic bowls replaced with shiny plastic ones. Eleanor found her baking tins, gifts from her late husband, packed into boxes without her permission. But each time she opened her mouth to protest, Mia would smile sweetly and say, "Change is good, Grandma. You need to modernize." Eleanor swallowed her discomfort. She didn't want to be a burden. Things escalated when Derek began inviting his friends over. Loud voices and the smell of smoke filled the house at night. Eleanor would retreat quietly to her room, clutching her cardigan tighter around her thin shoulders, telling herself it was temporary. One afternoon, while searching for an old family album, Eleanor found several of her belongings stacked messily in the backyard shed. Her knitted blanket, Daniel's tools, her wedding china, all tossed carelessly. A cold ache spread through her chest. She brought the album inside, and found Mia scrolling through her phone on the couch. "Mia, why are my things in the shed?" Eleanor asked softly. Mia didn't look up. "We just needed more space. You don't use that stuff." "But those were your grandfather's." "Oh, Grandma," Mia sighed, finally meeting her eyes. "It's just things. You don't need all this. Let us handle the house. You should relax at your age." Eleanor stood there, feeling something heavy settle inside her. Hurt, confusion, a quiet, deep betrayal she couldn't yet fully understand. The chapter closed that day, not with shouting, but with Eleanor's silent realization. Her home no longer felt like hers. And for the first time in her life, she wondered if love alone was enough to keep people kind. The days that followed felt heavier, as if the air inside Eleanor's home had thickened with something cold and unwelcome. What once felt like a sanctuary now felt like an occupied territory. Every corner touched, moved, or rearranged without her consent. Mia and Derek settled into the house as if it were theirs, but Eleanor kept telling herself they were just stressed, just overwhelmed, just young. She wanted to believe that. But belief began to hurt. Every morning, Eleanor woke earlier than both of them. She would tiptoe around the kitchen, trying not to disturb them, although it was her house. She made tea the way she always had, loose leaves steeped in her old ceramic teapot. But one morning, while pouring it, Derek walked in, wrinkling his nose. "Why does it smell like an old folks' home in here?" he muttered. Eleanor froze with the teapot in her hands. The words cut sharper than Derek realized. Or maybe he fully knew. Mia emerged moments later, brushing past Eleanor as if she were invisible. "You really should switch to instant coffee, Grandma. It's faster," she said, digging through the pantry that used to be meticulously organized. Eleanor simply nodded, setting her teapot aside. She reminded herself of the years she had spent caring for Mia when her daughter worked long shifts. She remembered the scraped knees she bandaged, the bedtime stories she read, the warm bowls of soup she ladled out during fevers. Yet somehow, today, she felt like a stranger in her own kitchen. As the weeks passed, the disrespect grew bolder. Groceries disappeared before she could even cook a meal. Mia and Derek stopped thanking her for anything. When the electricity bill came, Derek tossed it onto the table and said, "You should cover this one, Eleanor. We're still trying to get back on track." Eleanor blinked. "But I usually cover all the household bills." "Exactly," Derek replied, smirking. "So nothing new. Don't make it weird." She stared at the bill long after he left the room. A part of her broke quietly, silently. The worst moment came one rainy evening. Eleanor had spent the entire afternoon preparing dinner. Her late husband's favorite dish, something she hadn't cooked in years. Slow-cooked chicken, fresh vegetables, warm bread that filled the house with the smell of home. She hummed to herself while cooking, remembering the way Daniel used to sit at the kitchen table, telling her stories from work as she stirred the pot. The memories made her feel whole. She set the table gently, smoothing the tablecloth with trembling hands. She imagined Mia smiling, Derek appreciating a home-cooked meal. She imagined, foolishly, gratitude. But when the door opened, the sound of drunken laughter filled the house. Mia stumbled in first, giggling, Derek behind her talking loudly into his phone. They barely glanced at Eleanor. "Dinner is ready," she said softly, hopeful. Derek approached the pot, lifted the lid, inhaled dramatically, and made a disgusted face. "What is this?" he scoffed. "Smells like retirement." Mia laughed with him. Eleanor's heart tightened. Before she could respond, Derek lifted the pot with one hand, walked to the trash bin, and dumped the entire dinner inside. The sound of the food splattering against plastic echoed in the kitchen. Eleanor gasped. "Derek," she whispered, horrified. I spent hours." "Yeah, well, we're ordering pizza," he said, wiping his hands as if touching her food had dirted them. Mia added, "Grandma, stop making weird old-fashioned stuff. Nobody eats this anymore." They both walked away, laughing, leaving Eleanor standing alone in the kitchen, staring at the trash bin. Her eyes burned, but she forced herself not to cry. They didn't deserve to see her pain. She sank onto a chair, hands trembling, breath shaking. She felt humiliated, powerless, small. And yet in that moment of quiet devastation, something inside her shifted. A small ember of strength, of self-respect, lit itself deep within her. She remembered the house deed locked safely in her drawer. She remembered the lawyer who had helped her after Daniel died. She remembered she was not helpless. The betrayal had gone too far. And for the first time, Eleanor allowed herself to think the unthinkable. They needed to leave. And she was going to make it happen. The morning after the dinner incident, Eleanor woke with a heaviness in her chest she hadn't felt in decades. Not since Daniel's passing had her home felt so foreign, so unsafe. She sat at the edge of her bed, fingers tracing the worn hem of her quilt, and realized something with painful clarity. If she didn't protect herself, no one else would. Her house, the home she and her husband built, had become a battlefield, and she was losing ground every day. But Eleanor was not a woman easily defeated. She'd survived poverty, widowhood, and raising a daughter alone. At 75, her body was fragile, but her mind was sharp. And today, she would need that sharpness more than ever. She began quietly. Before Mia and Derek woke, Eleanor took her handbag from the closet, slipped on her coat, and stepped outside. The morning air was cool, crisp, and smelled of dew, something she hadn't taken the time to appreciate in weeks. She walked slowly down the path, choosing each step with careful precision. The lawyer's office wasn't far, but it felt like miles, each step reminding her of her age, but also her determination. When she entered the small law office, a familiar face greeted her. "Mrs. Ward," the young lawyer, Mr. Graham, said, standing immediately. "Is everything all right?" Eleanor sat down, clasping her trembling hands together. I need to know what rights I have if people living in my home are treating me unfairly. Mr. Graham's expression softened. She explained everything. How Mia and Derek had moved in temporarily, how they'd slowly taken over the house, how they humiliated her, and finally, how they laughed as they threw her homemade dinner in the trash. Mr. Graham frowned deeply. Mrs. Ward, the house is solely in your name. You can remove them legally. Eleanor swallowed hard. I don't want drama. I don't want to hurt my granddaughter. You're not hurting her, he said gently. You're protecting yourself. His reassurance settled over her like a blanket. He explained the process. Formal eviction, a 30-day notice, legal documentation. All she had to do was sign. Her hand shook as she took the pen. But when she signed her name, something shifted inside her. A calmness. A steady warmth. A quiet strength she thought she had lost long ago. With the papers safely folded in her bag, she returned home before Mia and Derek woke. The house looked different now, not because they had changed it, but because she had changed. She no longer felt powerless. She no longer felt erased. For the first time in months, she felt in control. Over the next few days, she prepared silently. She packed her valuable belongings, her wedding ring, Daniel's watch, old photographs, and stored them in her bedroom closet. She changed the passwords to her bank accounts, updated her security settings, and made sure all important documents were safely tucked away. Meanwhile, Mia and Derek continued their careless reign over the house. They played loud music until night. They hosted friends who trampled through the living room, leaving empty cans and muddy footprints behind. Mia barked orders at Eleanor. Do this, don't touch that, move out of the way. As if she were a bothersome housemaid instead of the homeowner. One evening, Derek shouted across the living room. You should be grateful, Eleanor. Most people your age are in nursing homes. We're doing you a favor letting you stay here. Letting her stay. In her own home. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment, really looked. At the man her granddaughter chose. The man who now spoke to her with entitlement dripping from every word. And instead of breaking, she felt the ember inside her burn brighter. That night, she placed a framed photo of Daniel on her nightstand. His warm smile gazed back at her. She touched the glass gently and whispered, I'm going to make things right, my love. By the time the sun rose the next morning, the eviction papers were ready in her sweater pocket. And Eleanor Ward, a 75-year-old woman who had been pushed too far, finally felt her strength. The house was strangely quiet on the morning Eleanor chose to reclaim her life. Outside, the sky was painted in soft strokes of pink and gold, the kind of sunrise Daniel used to admire. She stood near the kitchen counter, her wrinkled hands smoothing the edge of the folded eviction papers tucked securely into her sweater pocket. Her heart beat steadily, not out of fear, but out of resolve. Today, everything would change. By early evening, Mia and Derek returned home in their usual cloud of noise. The front door slammed, followed by laughter and the clatter of keys tossed carelessly onto the table. Eleanor was in the kitchen preparing a simple meal for herself, just a small plate of vegetables and a slice of fresh bread. She moved gently, as though the act of feeding herself was a quiet form of resistance, a vow to preserve her dignity. Derek entered first, sniffing the air with exaggerated disgust. Again, he groaned. Grandma food. Mia followed him, rolling her eyes. She still doesn't get it. We don't eat this boring stuff. She walked to the trash bin, lifted the lid, and smirked. You should just stop cooking altogether, Grandma. You're wasting food. Eleanor turned to face them, her expression calm, eerily calm. Dinner is ready, she said softly. If you want any. Derek snorted. Not a chance. Then, without hesitation, he grabbed the plate from her hands. Before Eleanor could react, he dropped the entire meal straight into the trash. The sound of the plate hitting the garbage echoed through the kitchen like a final insult. Mia laughed, leaning on Derek's shoulder as if it were all some private joke. But Eleanor didn't flinch. For the first time since they had moved in, she didn't feel a single tear, a single tremor of fear. She simply looked at the trash bin, then at the two people she once welcomed with open arms. And she smiled. A small, calm, knowing smile. What's funny? Derek asked, suddenly uneasy. Eleanor reached into her sweater pocket and pulled out the folded document. Her fingers didn't shake this time. Her voice came out steady and clear, carrying a strength none of them had expected. "This," she said, handing Derek the papers. He unfolded them impatiently, then froze. Mia stepped beside him, reading over his shoulder. The color drained from both their faces. Eviction notice. 30 days to vacate the premises. Property owner, Eleanor May Ward. The silence that followed was heavier than any insult they had ever thrown at her. You can't be serious," Mia stammered. "Grandma, what is this?" Eleanor stood straighter than she had in years. "This is my home. And you will leave it." Derek's voice rose. "You can't kick us out. We live here." "You do not own this house," Eleanor replied firmly. "You never have. And after tonight, you will never mistreat me again." Mia's eyes filled with panic. "Grandma, we didn't mean anything. We were just..." Eleanor held up her hand. "No more lies. No more excuses. I have been patient. I have been kind. I have given you everything I could. But you have taken advantage of my love, my home, and my trust." Derek's fists clenched as if he might argue again, but the legal stamp at the bottom of the page silenced him. There was nothing he could do. The next 30 days were filled with tension, pleading, even attempts at manipulation. But Eleanor did not bend. She had found her strength, and she held on to it tightly. On the final day, Mia and Derek dragged their suitcases out with sour faces. Mia mumbled a half-hearted apology that dissolved before it reached the air. Derek said nothing at all. When the door finally closed behind them, the silence felt different. It felt like freedom. Eleanor walked to the kitchen, made herself a warm meal, and sat at the table alone. But this time she didn't feel lonely. She felt triumphant. She took a bite of her dinner, the flavor simple but comforting, and allowed her eyes to fill with tears, not of sadness but of relief. "For the first time in months," she whispered into the quiet, "this house feels like mine again." And it truly did.